will concentrate on how regional policy supports cooperation and competition. For reasons of time, I will concentrate on the business sector and the enterprises. Competition and cooperation in our eyes exist simultaneously in Europe's economic processes, but intensity and characteristics vary from member state to member state. And competition and cooperation both exist at different levels, at a continental level between Europe's economy as a whole and the world outside, the Russia, China, USA, and the other emerging countries, for instance. But competition and cooperation exist also between the economies of member states as a whole, and naturally we have competition and cooperation at the level of individual economic actors like enterprises. They are competing and cooperating between each other within a member state or with enterprises in other member states or with enterprises outside of the European Union. The European regional policy, ladies and gentlemen, is still the financially largest EU policy. Nearly 35% of the EU budget, or the 325 billion euro for 2014-2020 will be devoted for supporting the economic development in its 273 regions. With this substantial amount, we are supporting both competitiveness as well as cooperation. This is no antagonism for us, as long as cooperation leads to an increased competitiveness of the cooperating partners in order to create at the end growth and jobs. We support the cooperation between whole countries and regions, but also the cooperation between individual economic actors. And we support the competitiveness of whole economies and of individual economic actors. Let me go a little bit more into detail and start with our support measures to increase the competitiveness of economies as a whole. In that field, it is clear that the construction of new or the modernization of existing infrastructure networks stood in the foreground. Particularly some South European countries, like Spain, had, and all Central and East European enlargement countries still have, huge deficits in their motorway, road, railway, electricity and broadband networks. The removal of bottlenecks and the improvement of their infrastructure's capacities and efficiency is a prerequisite for economic development of whole regions and countries. Without modern infrastructure networks, dangerous socio-economic imbalances within member states and within the European Union would persist and hinder any progress in gaining competitiveness. The results of these investment efforts in infrastructure have been substantial, also here in Italy, so substantial that we will in future, in our next programming period 2014-2020, not support infrastructure investments in the advanced regions anymore, but only in less developed regions, and there only to a lesser extent than hitherto. When supporting the increase of competitiveness of whole member states, we will in future move away from the predominant promotion of infrastructure to more focus on research and innovation and application of ICT. Here, the EU has still a substantial deficit vis-à-vis the United States, Japan and South Korea, we have heard before, although we know that Europe's economic competitiveness will depend essentially on research and innovation and its introduction into the business cycle more than ever before. Another crucial factor, ladies and gentlemen, for the competitiveness of whole economies are high levels of labor mobility, employment skills, lifelong learning, training. Here we spend considerable amounts of our European Social Fund, belonging to regional policy, in order to improve the situation. Without a highly educated, mobile and employable labor force, we will not catch up and get out rapidly from the economic crisis. But let us not forget the attractivity of cities as important elements for the competitiveness of whole economies. Cities which are attractive not only in aesthetic terms, they literally attract skills, capital, innovative ideas, innovative people, and as a consequence, foreign direct investment, capital, and tourists. The preservation and exploitation of the natural and cultural heritage, I underline that, of a country plays in that context an important role, and we will continue to support investments into such projects in that field. Certainly an aspect particularly important for Southern Europe. Mainly for Central and Eastern European countries, it is relevant that we also support the improvement of the institutional capacities and the build-up of an efficient public administration. We must not forget that many new member states, until they gained freedom in 1989-1990, did not have modern administrations comparable to ours. I have given you some very brief indications about how we support the increase of competitiveness of whole economies. A few figures should illustrate the financial dimension of our efforts to bring European regions which are less competitive on a higher level. We have defined the less developed regions as regions where the GDP is below 75% of the EU average. These 84 European regions we call convergence regions, which will receive the vast majority of our structural funds, namely 82%. Only 16% of our funds will go into the 168 advanced or competitiveness regions, whose GDP is above 90% of the EU average. So you clearly can see by these figures that the majority of our structural funds is fueled into the minority of less developed regions, which are localized generally in Southern and in Central and Eastern Europe. The member states in which the advanced regions are situated get less financial support from the EU regional and other policies than they financially support from their regional and other policies, contribute to the EU budget. On the other side, the member states with the less developed regions get more out of the regional policy and other policies funding than they pay into the EU budget or in the EU household, which in sum means that the advanced regions substantially finance the less advanced regions. This fundamental element of our regional policy is a clear example of cooperation. Without the solidarity of the net payers, we could not support the net receivers. Without the readiness to cooperate in order to increase the competitiveness of the less developed regions, we could not achieve our main regional policy goal: less economic differences and better territorial cohesion in Europe. But let me, before I tell you what we do in order to support cooperation, let me conclude the chapter about our measures to raise competitiveness, namely competitiveness of individual economic actors, particularly of the business sector, of enterprises. What we can state in general is that currently many European enterprises are not sufficiently prepared to take full profit from competition, that their competitiveness is frequently insufficient, both for competing with companies within their countries as well as competing on a globalized level with companies outside. Enterprises have to be strong enough to survive in today's globalized economy. The reasons for lacking competitiveness are manifold. They have been mentioned, so I don't go into detail of that. We will therefore try to help them. We will, for instance, enhance the application of ICT, the development of new ICT products and services, the spread of e-commerce. And even more importantly, we will enhance the competitiveness of individual, small and medium-sized enterprises. It is generally acknowledged that SMEs are creating more jobs than other types of enterprises and therefore are key to economic growth. We want to contribute with our policies to growth and jobs, and therefore we will massively support SMEs through promoting entrepreneurship, in particular through facilitating the economic exploitation of new ideas and fostering the creation of new firms and business incubators. We will support new business models for SME, particularly for their internationalization. We will also strengthen the capacities of SME to engage in growth in any markets and in any innovation process. Apropos innovation, we will support also research and innovation activities of individual actors. Thus, we will co-finance research and innovation infrastructures, R&I capacities, and centers for competence. We will promote business investment also by SMEs in innovation and research, technological and applied research, pilot lines, early product validation, etc., etc. Our overall goal, by the way, to protect the environment and to promote resource efficiency also allows to promote innovative technologies in that field and to support industrial transition towards a resource-efficient economy. This goes so far that we will support the use of renewable energies in individual enterprises too. It is clear that our strong focus on the shift towards a low-carbon economy in all sectors will lead to many new business opportunities for individual enterprises. Ladies and gentlemen, in the past, regional policy has sometimes been criticized, confronted with critiques that it distributes funding too widely and too thinly spread over the economy. And thus the positive impact of the money spent for regional economic development remains too low. We want to avoid that and therefore have introduced a strict thematic concentration of our spending activities for 2013-2020. As a consequence, in less advanced regions, for instance here in southern Italy, at least 50% of our funding hitherto has to be spent for only 4 goals. First, SME. Second, research and innovation. 3, ICT. And 4, low-carbon economy. I have described a number of measures just before. For the advanced regions, we are even more ambitious. They will have to concentrate, and they don't like it at all, I have to say, at least 80% of our funds on those 4 goals only. This concentration will be accompanied by an increased result orientation of our policy, by clear indicators which will be set in advance and have to be achieved by the concrete programs and projects. Let me now come to the second element of this panel's title, namely to which cooperation? How does the EU regional policy support cooperation? Once more, I will concentrate on enterprises, on the business sector. But why is cooperation good and necessary at all? In short, because by joint efforts, cooperating partners become stronger, reach the critical mass which is frequently needed, be it in putting together material, financial, intellectual resources, or be it by exchanging know-how and skills. And as a European, I may say that, because all that brings Europeans closer to each other. Individuals, enterprises, regions and states, and finally drives European integration forward. Cooperation between actors takes place at different levels and with different objectives. The big framework for financial support is our so-called European Territorial Cooperation, acronym ETC. For 2014-2020, 9 billion euros will be provided at 3 levels. 2 of them are with direct relevance to the business sector first. Transnational cooperation, that is the cooperation between at least 2 individual actors, enterprises, research centers, public bodies, from at least 2 countries, taking part in one of our 13 transnational programs. The individual actors together set up a joint project for which they ask our support. Each of these transnational cooperation programs unites a number of member and non-member states of a distinct geo-economic space. For in Southern Europe, 3 transnational programs are relevant. First, the Mediterranean program covering 9 states from Gibraltar to over Italy to Greece. Second, the Southwest European program just covering Spain, Portugal and France. And third, the Southeast European program covering 6 non-member and 8 member states, including Italy and Greece. I will have to be a bit shorter than I have intended and leave out the details of these programs. I could go into that in the following discussion, but to conclude probably with the second rail of our European territorial cooperation, that is the cross-border cooperation. The main objective of this cross-border cooperation is to reduce the negative effects of borders as in administrative, legal, physical barriers, tackle common problems and exploit untapped potential. Cross-border cooperation deals with a wide range of issues which include encouraging entrepreneurship, especially the development of SMEs, tourism, culture and cross-border trade. We have a budget for that of 1.5 billion euro in the current period. And also here, projects are developed by at least 2 actors from at least 2 different regions along a national border between members, but also between member and non-member states. Currently, we are implementing 53 cross-border cooperation programs purely between member states' border regions. 8 programs are relevant for Southern Europe. We have several ones for Italy, Sicily, Malta, Italian regions with Western Greece, or Northern Greece with Bulgaria, and so on and so on. But there are also 10 cross-border cooperation programs between member states and non-member states. 3 of them in Southern Europe. Greek regions are cooperating with regions from Italy, Albania, Slovenia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Croatia. And the latter illustrates, I think, very well one goal which we want to achieve with CBC, with cross-border cooperation too, namely to raise the socio-economic level of future member states as a preparation for the EU member states. More political goal is to overcome historic neighborhood problems between certain states on the Western Balkan. They have to be made interested and made acquainted with actors from their neighbor states. Even the idea of cooperation has still to be brought closer into this area. Strengthening cooperation activities in the Western Balkans will foster peaceful relations between former war enemies and thus contribute to peace in Europe. Our strategy to support predominantly economic cooperation, you see, it serves ultimately also to achieve a very political goal. And with that words, I would like to conclude. Also, I have foreseen even a chapter on what could be interesting for Italy. Not only we are developing currently a new macro-regional strategy for the Adriatic and Ionian space, but all right, if you give me another 15 minutes, I do that. Thank you very much.